Okay, so I'm going to try my best here, but I thought I'd mention that the main reason I'm trying this is that one, I love analyzing films, but also I think some of the work I'm trying to do with film studies and theories in general, I'm learning from one of my classes, or I was during the semester, and I thought it would help me with my exams. And technically, when I wrote the script for this video, it did help me understand the theories better. But also I wrote it back in February and it's June now, and the semester got too busy and it wasn't able to actually make the essay. But we're gonna start off with it now. So I heard about Mother on Instagram, and I somehow automatically decided that I would watch it to analyze it, and boy was I right, because I felt like I was on a roller coaster of emotions. From dialogue to visual and technical aspects, every single detail of this film had something to say. I went from feeling shocked, exasperated, dismayed, even somewhat sympathetic, and slowly reaching some sort of understanding over the characters. But first, let me try and tell you about the film itself. So in short, and I'll copy this right from the description because I don't want to go on rambling too much at the beginning, is we have a character, Shuhei, whose apparently erratic mother feels threatened when he starts to awaken to a world beyond her distorted control, sending the family hurling towards tragedy. Now there's Shuhei and Akiko. So they really only have each other, but his mother is, to say the least, a poor parental figure. She's controlling and careless over him in her everyday life. Shuhei's well-being is more of an afterthought, ignored even, unless she needs him for something, and that thing has almost always been money. So I think one of the first things that you notice, or I noticed once the film began, was color theory. I think Mother is one of the films where you learn the most about the character's emotional states through the mise-en-scène. A majority of the film follows up with incredibly dull colors. There's shades of gray all over, and that makes sense when you know what's happening. Bright colors. This is where Shuhei and Akiko, they're genuinely happy or playful, and they're playing in a pool. There's an abundance of bright blue in this scene, and that's the extent of bright and lively colors we see at any point in the film. So it's just blue and just once. In fact, in some scenes, the colors are so pale that I thought Shuhei himself just blended into the walls in the background, and he was barely even there. So in the same way, when you look at how the camera itself was used in adding to the narrative, most of the shots are long shots, and they're mostly, or at least for most of the first half of the film, they're fixed. In fact, we can even see that they're set up with Shuhei as the center. And the first half of the film shows some sense of stability. Now, by no means are things practically stable, but they are carrying forward in the same way they always have. Shuhei is left alone and responsible for carrying money and dividing their finances, while his mother avoids work or loses jobs or his one-night stands or goes to different cities with different men. Now, during this part of the film, the shots are set up at a distance, and I think this is aimed to specifically set up Shuhei against the world. He is small compared to his surroundings. He can't reach doors, he can't carry multiple things, he isn't physically strong, he isn't supposed to be responsible, and the camera communicates that. We don't see a shift to handheld camera movements until the second half of the film when Shuhei is grown up, but also the typical stability is disturbed and things start to go haywire for the family. So, through the character positioning itself, we learn how isolated Shuhei is. He's almost always seen at the back of the scene. We see his image through reflection. We see him walking behind his mother as she carelessly wanders forward with different men. He's either alone in the frame or left behind around other characters. And even in the one family scene we see at the beginning of the film, where Akiko fights for money with her mother and sister during the argument, Shuhei gets completely blocked by his mother. So she moves forward in frame and he disappears behind her. So given the nature of their argument, which is to ask for money, and this money, she spends everything from her earnings to child support on alcohol and partying, and Shuhei gets nothing, essentially. Electricity, water bills, they're left unpaid to the point where Akiko leaves him home alone and goes to a different city with a man she meets as he sits at home, and the electricity goes out. And this is also one of the first scenes where we see the shot switch from long to close-up and handheld, and I think that's mirroring the sort of chaos going through Shuhei's mind himself because he doesn't understand what's happening. And the more things get out of hand and bizarre, the more close-up shots we see. Especially after the time jump to 5 years forward, there's an influx of close-up shots with each bizarre demand or request or favor Shuhei's mother asks of him. So, at the same time, I think it's important that the film has no accompanying background music, so most of it is followed with natural sounds, but the first time that we do hear music is when the film reaches its breaking point on the normal to absolutely bizarre scale. There's also a lot of setting repetition in the latter half of the film, and it is symbolic when the characters are put in the exact same places and positions to show how far they've come, but it's significant here because the characters have not come to a distance, and instead of improving from what they had, things have just been derailing further and further, and we see Shuhei and Akiko in the exact locations or positions as earlier in the film, but in alarmingly different contexts, worse in many ways. And for the first time, we see them at a fountain. She's asking him to inform her parents about her pregnancy and ask for more money. But the second time we see them in that exact same location is after he murders his grandparents because his mother asks him to, because she claims it's the only way for them to survive. And I think one conclusion I reached with this was that the events surrounding Akiko guide the story forward, but what happens and the cinematography itself, it relies entirely on Shuhei and how he feels and what he's going through and what his mother does to him. And I also think it's interesting that we skip all these big moments like the pregnancy period and birth and how they dealt with that and moving to homeless, and we experience the after effects or the emotional turmoil, not the events themselves, just the consequences and how everything's dealt with. So, fortunately or unfortunately, the theory focus for one of my classes when I watched this film was Freud, and maybe that subconsciously caused it, but the one analysis I kept thinking of under the film was, well, psychoanalysis or psychosexual. I'm still gathering the reins of it when I was working on this, so let's just try to make some sense of the film with this. So, the one background that we were given on Akiko was in all her singular diegetic full-blown fight with her mother and sister, and within that all we were told is that she felt ignored. And during her time at home, all the attention went to her sister, who moved on to go to university and graduate. But the response from Akiko was that she never studied or focused on school because she didn't feel like she belonged at home. Now, like I said, that the plot focus is really specific. It almost ignores external events, and primarily we see what has become, so we never really learn or see what Akiko went through in her child or what caused her to be this way. And her backstory is presented to us in an almost villainizing way. She's portrayed as a bad guy who had no ambition or desire to do more, and the more in the subject here does fall under stereotypical ideas of social success, yes, but through the events of her life, she did get pregnant. She does have Shuhei to look after, yet her treatment and attitude towards him are offensive. So part of me thought this was to show life through Shuhei's lens and how he sees it. After all, we only see what he sees. We're feeling and thinking through him. So we feel his abandonment, isolation, confusion throughout the film. We connect with his desire to do and want more out of his life, but the very obvious obstacle in his way is Akiko emotionally manipulating him and making him believe that because of their economic and social position, Shuhei will never be able to amount to anything. She throws away the books he gets from the free school and child protective service workers, and when Shuhei wants to go to school and he wants to stay, she makes a comment about him only wanting to stay because he wants to have sex with her assigned worker. So you can look at this as Akiko channeling her doubts and fears and trying to protect Shuhei from the disappointment and dejection she felt, but to be fair, this is what a lot of parents do because they think they're protecting their children from worse, but the truth of the matter is trying to protect your child from bad shouldn't equal to putting them through worse yourself. And then this is where the story starts getting a little more messed up. So through this, you have to remember that the one thing Akiko constantly does is sleep with different men. And the one person who ends up becoming her boyfriend also becomes the reason she leaves her son alone with a child services worker. She then leaves Shuhei alone at home and goes to a different city to party and drink. And when she comes back, she yells at her son over the bills not being paid and there being no water or electricity. And then they think of blackmailing the service worker with sexual assault on Shuhei, which, by the way, Shuhei was not sexually assaulted by their worker. She just wants money because she spent everything on alcohol, and they accidentally severely injure the worker at his home and think he's dead and run away. And then she finds out that she's pregnant, and then the man leaves her, and then she sleeps with the bellboy of the motel 5 seconds after that. I'm not kidding, he walks in right after the baby daddy leaves, and then they sleep together. And the same thing happens after the 5-year time jump. The baby daddy walks back into their life because he has money problems and they have to run away again, and he ends up leaving again and they go live in a completely different place where Shuei works in construction while Akiko spends the money and makes him steal things, and when the owner yells at her to be a better mother and hires her as his assistant, she sleeps with him and they steal his money. And then they run away. Again. And then this final time they really have no money, so now Akiko thinks that they should go back to her parents and Shuei should murder them so they can get the inheritance. So you see where I'm going with this. And that really brought me to the theory that we were studying in class itself, and how Freud talked about repetition compulsion. That the reason why people may feel compelled to repeat unpleasant patterns of behavior regardless of them making us miserable, painful pleasure you could call it, he underlines that the reason we repeat harmful behavior patterns is to gain some sense of control over traumatic memory and be active actors over passive recipients. So in some way, Akiko was trying to gain control and return to her normal state, but again, we don't see enough about her past to hypothesize that. We just see a very consistent repetition of the same act. Her whole world seems to be attached to her body and sexuality, and sex to her is a way of engaging with any problem or obstacle they face, and her first instinct is to offer her body to the authority in charge, and the consequence ends up being her eventually getting her way, but also things barreling towards tragedy.